Tony Blair.
Anthony Charles Linton Blair is a British Labour Party politician who served as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2007. He was the Member of Parliament for Sedgefield from 1983 to 2007 and leader of the Labour Party from 1994 to 2007. Blair led Labour to a landslide victory in the 1997 general election, winning 418 seats, the most the party has ever held. The party went on to win two more elections under his leadership, in 2001, in which it won another landslide victory, and in 2005, with a significantly reduced majority. Blair was elected Labour Party leader in the leadership election of July 1994, following the sudden death of his predecessor, John Smith. Under his leadership, the party used the phrase New Labour to distance it from previous Labour policies. Blair declared opposition to the traditional conception of socialism, and declared support for a new conception that he referred to as socialism, involving politics that recognized individuals as socially interdependent, and advocated social justice, cohesion, equal worth of each citizen, and equal opportunity. Critics of Blair denounced him for having the Labour Party abandon genuine socialism and accepting capitalism. Supporters, including the party's own public opinion pollster Philip Gould, stated that after 4 consecutive general election defeats, Labour had to demonstrate that it had made a decisive break from its left-wing past, in order to win again. In May 1997, at 43 years old, Blair won a landslide general election victory, the largest in Labour Party history, to become the youngest Prime Minister since Lord Liverpool in 1812. He attained early personal popularity, receiving a 93% public approval rating in September 1997, after the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. In the first years of the new Labour government, Blair's government implemented a number of 1997 manifesto pledges, introducing the National Minimum Wage Act, Human Rights Act and Freedom of Information Act, and carrying out devolution, establishing the Scottish Parliament, the National Assembly for Wales, and the Northern Ireland Assembly. Blair's role as Prime Minister was particularly visible in foreign and security policy, including in Northern Ireland, where he was involved in the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. From the start of the War on Terror in 2001, Blair strongly supported the foreign policy of U.S. President George W. Bush, notably by participating in the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan and 2003 invasion of Iraq. Blair is the Labour Party's longest-serving Prime Minister, the only person to have led the Labour Party to more than 2 consecutive general election victories, and the only Labour Prime Minister to serve consecutive terms, more than one of which was at least 4 years long. Blair was succeeded as leader of the Labour Party on June 24, 2007 and as Prime Minister on June 27, 2007 by Gordon Brown. On the day he resigned as Prime Minister, he was appointed the official envoy of the Quartet on the Middle East. In May 2008, Blair launched his Tony Blair Faith Foundation. This was followed in July 2009 by the launching of the Faith and Globalization Initiative with Yale University in the US, Durham University in the UK and the National University of Singapore in Asia to deliver a postgraduate program in partnership with the foundation.
Early life.
Blair was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, on May 6, 1953, the second son of Leo and Hazel Blair, née Cuscaden. Leo Blair, the illegitimate son of 2 English actors, had been adopted as a baby by Glasgow shipyard worker James Blair and his wife, Mary. Hazel Cuscaden was the daughter of George Cuscaden, a butcher and orangeman who moved to Glasgow in 1916 but returned to, and later died in, Ballyshannon in 1923, where his wife, Sarah Margaret, née Lipsett, gave birth to Blair's mother, Hazel, above her family's grocery shop. Blair has one elder brother, Sir William Blair, a High Court judge, and a younger sister, Sarah. Blair spent the first 19 months of his life at the family home in Paisley Terrace in the Willowbrae area of Edinburgh. During this period, his father worked as a junior tax inspector whilst also studying for a law degree from the University of Edinburgh. In the 1950s, his family spent 3.5 years in Adelaide, Australia, where his father was a lecturer in law at the University of Adelaide. The Blairs lived close to the university, in the suburb of Dulwich. The family returned to the UK in the late 1950s, living for a time with Hazel Blair's stepfather, William Maclay, and her mother at their home in Steps, near Glasgow. He spent the remainder of his childhood in Durham, England, where his father Leo lectured at Durham University.
Education.
After attending the chorister school in Durham from 1961 to 1966, Blair boarded at Fettes College, a prestigious independent school in Edinburgh, during which time he met Charlie Falconer, a pupil at the rival Edinburgh Academy, whom he later appointed Lord Chancellor. He reportedly modelled himself on Mick Jagger. His teachers were unimpressed with him. His biographer John Reen-Towell reported that all the teachers I spoke to when researching the book said he was a complete pain in the backside and they were very glad to see the back of him. After Fettes, Blair spent a year in London, where he attempted to find fame as a rock music promoter before reading jurisprudence at St John's College, Oxford. As a student, he played guitar and sang in a rock band called Ugly Rumours. During this time, he dated future American Psycho director Mary Harron. He was influenced by fellow student and Anglican priest Peter Thompson, who awakened within Blair a deep concern for religious faith and left-wing politics. While Blair was at Oxford, his mother Hazel died of cancer, which greatly affected him. After graduating from Oxford in 1975 with a second-class honours BA in jurisprudence, Blair became a member of Lincoln's Inn, enrolled as a pupil barrister, and met his future wife, Cherie Booth, daughter of the actor Tony Booth, at the Law Chambers founded by Derry Irvine, who was to be Blair's first Lord Chancellor, 11 King's Bench Walk Chambers. He appears in a number of reported cases, for example as in Nethermere, St Neots, Limited v Gardner, where he represented employers unsuccessfully in an attempt to deny female factory workers their holiday pay.
Early political career.
Blair joined the Labour Party shortly after graduating from Oxford in 1975. During the early 1980s, he was involved in Labour politics in Hackney South and Shoreditch, where he aligned himself with the soft left of the party. In 1982 Blair was selected as the Labour candidate in the safe Conservative seat of Beaconsfield, where there was a forthcoming by-election. Although Blair lost the Beaconsfield by-election, the only election he lost in his 25-year political career, and he lost 10% of the vote, he acquired a profile within the party. In contrast to his later centrism, Blair made it clear in a letter he wrote to Labour leader Michael Foot in July 1982, that he had come to socialism through Marxism, and considered himself on the left. The letter was eventually published in June 2006. In 1983, Blair found the newly created constituency of Sedgefield, a notionally safe Labour seat near where he had grown up in Durham. The branch had not made a nomination, and Blair visited them. Several sitting MPs displaced by boundary changes were interested in securing selection to fight the seat. With the crucial support of John Burton, Blair won their endorsement. At the last minute, he was added to the shortlist and won the selection over Les Huckfield. Burton later became Blair's election agent and one of his most trusted and longest-standing allies. Blair's election literature in the 1983 UK general election endorsed left-wing policies that Labour advocated in the early 1980s. He called for Britain to leave the EEC, though he had told his selection conference that he personally favoured continuing membership. He also supported unilateral nuclear disarmament as a member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Blair was helped on the campaign trail by soap opera actress Pat Phoenix, his father-in-law's girlfriend. Blair was elected as MP for Sedgefield despite the party's landslide defeat in the general election. In his maiden speech in the House of Commons on July 6, 1983, Blair stated, "I am a socialist not through reading a textbook that has caught my intellectual fancy, nor through unthinking tradition, but because I believe that, at its best, socialism corresponds most closely to an existence that is both rational and moral. It stands for cooperation, not confrontation. For fellowship, not fear. It stands for equality. the Labour Party is declared in its constitution to be a democratic socialist party rather than a social democratic party. Blair himself organised this declaration of Labour to be a socialist party when he dealt with the change to the party's Clause 4 in their constitution. Once elected, Blair's political ascent was rapid. He received his first front-bench appointment in 1984 as Assistant Treasury Spokesman. In May 1985, he appeared on BBC's Question Time, arguing that the Conservative government's public order white paper was a threat to civil liberties. Blair demanded an inquiry into the Bank of England's decision to rescue the collapsed Johnson Matthey Bank in October 1985 and embarrassed the government by finding an EEC report critical of British economic policy that had been countersigned by a member of the Conservative government. By this time, Blair was aligned with the reforming tendencies in the party, headed by leader Neil Kinnock, and was promoted after the 1987 election to the Shadow Trade and Industry team as spokesman in the City of London. In 1987, he stood for election to the Shadow Cabinet, receiving 71 votes. When Kinnock resigned after a Conservative landslide in the 1992 election, Blair became Shadow Home Secretary under John Smith.
Leader of the Opposition.
John Smith died suddenly in 1994 of a heart attack. Blair beat John Prescott and Margaret Beckett in the subsequent leadership election and became Leader of the Opposition. As is customary for the holder of that office, Blair was appointed a Privy Councillor. Blair announced at the end of his speech at the 1994 Labour Party conference that he intended to replace Clause 4 of the party's constitution with a new Statement of Aims and Values. This involved the deletion of the party's stated commitment to the common ownership of the means of production and exchange, which was widely interpreted as referring to wholesale nationalisation. At a special conference in April 1995, the clause was replaced by a statement that the party is democratic socialist. He inherited the Labour leadership at a time when the party was ascendant over the Tories in the opinion polls, since the Tory government's reputation for monetary excellence was left in tatters by the Black Wednesday economic disaster of September 1992. Blair's election as leader saw Labour support surge higher still in spite of the continuing economic recovery and fall in unemployment that the Conservative government, led by John Major, had overseen since the end of the 1990-92 recession. At the 1996 Labour Party conference, Blair stated that his three top priorities on coming to office were education, education, and education. Aided by the unpopularity of John Major's Conservative government, itself deeply divided over the European Union, New Labour won a landslide victory in the 1997 general election, ending 18 years of Conservative Party government, with the heaviest Conservative defeat since 1832. During Smith's leadership of the Labour Party, there were discussions with Paddy Ashdown, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, about forming a coalition government if the next general election resulted in a hung parliament. After Blair became leader, these talks continued, despite virtually every opinion poll since late 1992 having shown Labour with enough support to form a majority. However, the scale of the Labour victory meant that there was ultimately never any need for a coalition.
Prime Minister.
Blair became the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom on May 2, 1997, serving concurrently as First Lord of the Treasury, Minister for the Civil Service and leader of the Labour Party. The 43-year-old Blair became the youngest person to become Prime Minister since Lord Liverpool became Prime Minister at the age of 42 in 1812. With victories in 1997, 2001, and 2005, Blair was the Labour Party's longest-serving Prime Minister, the only person to lead the party to 3 consecutive general election victories.
Northern Ireland.
His contribution towards assisting the Northern Ireland peace process by helping to negotiate the Good Friday Agreement, after 30 years of conflict, was widely recognised. Following the Armagh bombing on August 15, 1998, by members of the Real IRA opposed to the peace process, which killed 29 people and wounded hundreds, Blair visited the County Tyrone town and met with victims at Royal Victoria Hospital, Belfast.
Military intervention and the War on Terror.
In his first 6 years in office, Blair ordered British troops into battle 5 times, more than any other Prime Minister in British history. This included Iraq in both 1998 and 2003, Kosovo, 1999, Sierra Leone, 2000, and Afghanistan, 2001. The Kosovo War, which Blair had advocated on moral grounds, was initially a failure when it relied solely on airstrikes. The threat of a ground offensive would convince Serbia's Slobodan Milosevic to withdraw. Blair had been a major advocate for a ground offensive, which Bill Clinton was reluctant to do, and would order that 50,000 soldiers, most of the available British Army, should be made ready for action. The following year, the limited Operation Paliza in Sierra Leone would swiftly swing the tide against the rebel forces. Before deployment, the United Nations mission in Sierra Leone had been on the verge of collapse. Paliza had been intended as an evacuation mission, but Brigadier David Richards, now General Sir, was able to convince Blair to allow him to expand the role. At the time, Richards' action was not known and Blair was assumed to be behind it. Blair also ordered Operation Barras, a highly successful SAS parachute regiment strike to rescue hostages from a Sierra Leone rebel group. Historian Andrew Marr has argued that the success of ground attacks, real and threatened, over airstrikes alone would be influential on how Blair planned the Iraq War, and that the success of the first 3 wars Blair fought played to his sense of himself as a moral war leader. When asked in 2010 if the success of Paliza may have emboldened British politicians to think of military action as a policy option, General Sir David Richards would admit there might be something in that. From the start of the War on Terror in 2001, Blair strongly supported the foreign policy of George W. Bush, participating in the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan and 2003 invasion of Iraq. The invasion of Iraq was particularly controversial, as it attracted widespread public opposition and 139 of Blair's MPs opposed it. As a result, he faced criticism over the policy itself and the circumstances in which it was decided upon. Alistair Campbell described Blair's statement that the intelligence on WMDs was beyond doubt as his assessment of the assessment that was given to him. In 2009, Blair stated that he would have supported removing Saddam Hussein from power even in the face of proof that he had no such weapons. Playwright Harold Pinter and former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad accused Blair of war crimes. Testifying before the Iraq inquiry on January 29, 2010, Blair said Saddam was a monster and I believe he threatened not just the region but the world. Blair said that British and American attitude towards Saddam Hussein had changed dramatically after September 11 attacks. Blair denied that he would have supported the invasion of Iraq even if he had thought Saddam had no weapons of mass destruction. He said he believed the world was safer as a result of the invasion. He also said that there was no real difference between wanting regime change and wanting Iraq to disarm. Regime change was U.S. policy because Iraq was in breach of its UN obligations.
Relationship with Parliament.
One of his first acts as Prime Minister was to replace the then twice-weekly 15-minute sessions of Prime Minister's Questions held on Tuesdays and Thursdays with a single 30-minute session on Wednesdays. In addition to PMQs, Blair held monthly press conferences at which he fielded questions from journalists and, from 2002, broke precedent by agreeing to give evidence twice yearly before the most senior Commons Select Committee, the Liaison Committee. Blair was sometimes perceived as paying insufficient attention both to the views of his own cabinet colleagues and to those of the House of Commons. His style was sometimes criticised as not that of a Prime Minister and head of government, which he was, but of a President and head of state, which he was not. Blair was accused of excessive reliance on spin. He is the first British Prime Minister to have been formally questioned by police, though not under caution, while still in office.
Events before resignation.
As the casualties of the Iraq War mounted, Blair was accused of misleading Parliament, and his popularity dropped dramatically. The Labour Party's overall majority in the 2005 general election was reduced to 66. As a combined result of the Blair-Brown Pact, Iraq War and low approval ratings, pressure built up within the Labour Party for Blair to resign. On September 7, 2006, Blair publicly stated he would step down as party leader by the time of the Trades Union Congress, TUC, conference held 10th to 13th September 2007, having promised to serve a full term during the previous general election campaign. On May 10, 2007, during a speech at the Trimdon Labour Club, Blair announced his intention to resign as Labour Party leader and Prime Minister. At a special party conference in Manchester on June 24, 2007, he formally handed over the leadership of the Labour Party to Gordon Brown, who had been Chancellor of the Exchequer. Blair tendered his resignation on June 27, 2007 and Brown assumed office the same afternoon. Blair also resigned his seat in the House of Commons in the traditional form of accepting the stewardship of the Chiltern Hundreds, to which he was appointed by Gordon Brown in one of the latter's last acts as Chancellor of the Exchequer. The resulting Sedgefield by-election was won by Labour's candidate, Phil Wilson. Blair decided not to issue a list of resignation honours, making him the first Prime Minister of the modern era not to do so.
Policies. Social reforms.
In 2001, Blair said, "We are a left-of-centre party, pursuing economic prosperity and social justice as partners and not as opposites." Blair has rarely applied such labels to himself, but he promised before the 1997 election that New Labour would govern from the radical centre, and according to one lifelong Labour Party member, has always described himself as a social democrat. However, at least one left-wing commentator has implied that Blair is to the right of centre. A YouGov opinion poll in 2005 also found that a small majority of British voters, including many New Labour supporters, place Blair on the right of the political spectrum. The Financial Times on the other hand has argued that Blair is not conservative, but instead a populist. Critics and admirers tend to agree that Blair's electoral success was based on his ability to occupy the centre ground and appeal to voters across the political spectrum, to the extent that he has been fundamentally at odds with traditional Labour Party values. Some left-wing critics have argued that Blair has overseen the final stage of a long-term shift of the Labour Party to the right, and that very little now remains of a Labour left. There is also evidence that Blair's long-term dominance of the centre has forced his Conservative opponents to shift a long distance to the left, in order to challenge his hegemony there. During his time as Prime Minister, Blair raised taxes, introduced a national minimum wage and some new employment rights, while keeping Margaret Thatcher's anti-trade union legislation. Introduced significant constitutional reforms. Promoted new rights for gay people in the Civil Partnership Act 2004. And signed treaties integrating Britain more closely with the EU. He introduced substantial market-based reforms in the education and health sectors. Introduced student tuition fees. Sought to reduce certain categories of welfare payments, and introduced tough anti-terrorism and identity card legislation. Under Blair's government the amount of new legislation increased which attracted criticism. Blair increased police powers by adding to the number of arrestable offences, compulsory DNA recording and the use of dispersal orders. According to one study, in terms of promoting social equality, the first Blair government turned out to be the most redistributive in decades. It ran Harold Wilson's 1960s government close. From 1997 to 2005, for instance, all the benefits targeted on children through tax credits, child benefit and income support had gone up by 72% in real terms. Improvements were also made in financial support to pensioners, and by 2004 the poorest third of pensioners were Ps $1,750 a year better off than under the system as it used to be. As a means of reducing energy costs and therefore the incidence of fuel poverty, a new program of grants for cavity wall and loft insulation and for draft proofing was launched, with some 670,000 homes taking up the scheme. Various adjustments were also made in social welfare benefits. Families were allowed to earn a little more before housing benefit was cut, and the benefit was raised for families where the breadwinner worked part-time, while 2 million pensioners were offered automatic help with their council tax bills, worth Ps $400 each, although many did not take advantage of this benefit. According to one study, the Blair administration's record on benefits, taken in the round, was unprecedented, with 3.7% real terms growth each year from 2002 to 2005. Under the years of the Blair administration, expenditure on social services was increased, while various anti-poverty measures were introduced. From 2001 to 2005, public spending increased by an average of 4.8% in real terms, while spending on transport went up by 8.5% per annum, health by 8.2% per annum, and education by 5.4% per annum. Between 1997 and 2005, child poverty was more than halved in absolute terms as a result of measures such as the extension of maternity pay, increases in child benefit, and by the growth in the numbers of people in employment. During that same period, the number of pensioners living in poverty fell by over 75% in absolute terms as a result of initiatives such as the introduction of winter fuel payments, the reduction of VAT on fuel, and the introduction of a minimum income guarantee. To reduce poverty traps for those making the transition from welfare to work, a minimum wage was established, together with a working tax credit and a child tax credit. Together with various tax credit schemes to supplement low earnings, the Blair government's policies significantly increased the earnings of the lowest income decile. In addition, under the Working Time Regulations of 1998, British workers gained a statutory entitlement to paid holidays. Between 1997 and 2003, spending on early years education and childcare rose in real terms from PS2 billion to PS3.6 billion. During Blair's first term in office, 100 early excellence centres opened, together with new nurseries, while 500 Sure Start projects began. Although the number of children fell, the amount of state support to families with children increased, with money paid only to them, child contingent support, going up by 52% in real terms from 1999 to 2005. The Blair administration also extended to 3-year-olds the right to a free nursery place for half a day Monday to Friday. Tax credits assisted some 300,000 families, at January 2004, with childcare costs, while the 2004 budget exempted the first PS50 of weekly payments to nannies and childminders from tax and national insurance, restricted to couples earning not more than PS43,000 per annum. The Countryside and Rights of Way Act of 2000 extended a legal right to walk to about 3,200 square miles of open countryside, mainly in the north of England. To strengthen the rights of people with disabilities, clauses of the Disability Discrimination Act that came into force in October 2004 obliged civilian employers to take steps to ensure their workplaces were suitable for people with disabilities and to scrutinize how they advertised and recruited staff. During its first year in office, the Blair government made the controversial decision of cutting lone parent benefit, which led to abstentions amongst many Labour MPs. In March 1998, however, Brown responded in his budget statement by increasing child benefit by PS2.50 a week above the rate of inflation, the largest ever increase in the benefit. Public expenditure on education, health, and social security rose more rapidly under the Blair government than it did under previous Labour governments, the latter due to initiatives such as the introduction of the Working Families Tax Credit and increases in pensions and child benefits. During the Blair government's time in office, incomes for the bottom 10% of earners increased as a result of transfers through the Social Security system. New rights for workers were introduced such as extended parental rights, a significant raising of the maximum compensation figure for unfair dismissal, a restoration of the qualifying period for protection against unfair dismissal to 12 months, and the right to be accompanied by a trade union official during a disciplinary or grievance hearing, whether or not a trade union is recognized. In addition, an Employee Relation Act was passed which introduced for the first time the legal right of employees to trade union representation. In 2003, the Working Families Tax Credit was split into two benefits, a working tax credit which was payable to all those in work, and a child tax credit which was payable to all families with children, whether in work or not. During Blair's time in office, over 2 million people had been lifted out of poverty. A proportional voting system was introduced for the election of Britain's MEPs, while legislation changing executive structures in local government was passed. Regional development agencies were set up in the 8 English regions outside London, and changes were made to the regulation of political parties and referendums, with the introduction of a new electoral commission and stricter spending rules. In addition, voting experiments resulted in an opening up of postal voting and reform of electoral registration, while the right of hereditary peers to sit in the House of Lords was abolished after 700 years. In addition, the Water Industries Act of 1999 ended the right of water companies to disconnect supplies as a sanction against non-payment. The Employment Act of 2002 extended rights to paternity, maternity, and adoption leave and pay, while the Police Reform Act of 2002 established community support officers and reorganized national intelligence gathering. The 2002 Adoption and Children Act enabled unmarried couples to apply to adopt while speeding up adoption procedures, while the Private Hire Vehicles, Carriage of Guide Dogs, Act of 2002 banned charges for guide dogs in minicabs. International Development Act of 2002 required spending to be used to reduce poverty and improve the welfare of the poor. The Travel Concessions, Eligibility Act passed that same year equalized the age at which men and women become entitled to travel concessions. Under the Homelessness Act of 2002, councils had to adopt homelessness strategies and do more for those homeless through no fault of their own, and the Commonhold and Leasehold Reform Act of 2002 made it easier to convert long-term residential leasehold into freehold through commonhold tenures. The British Overseas Territories Act of 2002 extended full British citizenship to 200,000 inhabitants of 14 British overseas territories, while the 2002 Office of Communications Act set up a new regulatory body known as the Office of Communications, Ofcom. The Enterprise Act of 2002 included measures to safeguard consumers, while also reforming bankruptcy and establishing a stronger Office of Fair Trading. Measures such as the Youth Inclusion Programme and the On-Track Programme were introduced to promote social inclusion and prevent people from falling into crime, while the Special Educational Needs and Disability Act of 2001 established legal rights for disabled students in pre- and post-16 education. The National Minimum Wage Enforcement Notices Act, passed in 2003, ensured that the Inland Revenue could issue enforcement notices to require the payment of the national minimum wage to former employees as well as current employees. The Carers, Equal Opportunities Act sought to ensure that carers were not disadvantaged because they cared for another person, while the Connections Service was set up to facilitate learning and employment by providing young people between the ages of 13 and 19, and up to the age of 25 for people with disabilities and learning difficulties, with the advice and support needed to make transitions into training and employment. Various measures were introduced to improve levels of child well-being, such as the Sure Start program and the Every Child Matters initiative, while the New Deal for Communities initiative was launched to set up regeneration schemes in deprived areas. The Sexual Offences Act of 2003 enabled courts in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland to deal with British citizens or residents who commit sexual offences against children abroad, while the Children Act of 2004 made provision about services provided to and for children and young people by local authorities and other bodies and required that they work together in improving the well-being of children in the local area. Following the tragic deaths of Chinese cockle pickers in Morecambe Bay in 2004, a new licensing authority was set up to regulate temporary and casual labour for agriculture and shellfish collection. The Domestic Violence, Crime and Victims Act of 2004 tightened restraints on perpetrators, and made common assault an arrestable offence, while the Civil Partnership Act of 2004 gave legal recognition to same-sex couples. More than 1 million new childcare places were established, and over 1.5 million mothers made use of a new right introduced in 2003 to request flexible working hours from their employer. The duration of maternity pay rose from 18 to 26 weeks by 2005, with the right to unpaid leave for a further 6 months, while new pension sharing arrangements on divorce were introduced to prevent women from ending up in old age penury. The Sex Discrimination, Election Candidates Act of 2002 allowed political parties to take positive measures to ensure a fairer gender balance in selections for candidates. Individual savings accounts were introduced in 1999, with 15 million people taking advantage of these in subsequent years. To improve people's skills, grants were introduced to help adult learners and a new entitlement to free training for all at Level 2 and targeted support at Level 3. The Age-Related Payments Act of 2004 introduced extra payments for pensioners aged 70+, while the Child Trust Funds Act of 2004 introduced an endowment for all children born after September 2002 of Ps 250, Ps 500 for children from poor families, to be invested in long-term accounts cashable at the age of 18. The Higher Education Act of 2004, while permitting top-up fees, also established a new Humanities Research Council and a new student complaint system. The Employment Relations Act of 2004 extended statutory recognition of unions and strengthened the law forbidding intimidation of union members. Voluntary stakeholder pension schemes were introduced, designed to offer an alternative to entirely private pensions for those on middle incomes. A minimum income guarantee for low-income pensioners, which was later called the Guarantee Credit, when the Savings Credit Scheme was introduced. The Savings Credit Scheme was introduced to supplement the incomes of those with relatively low private pensions, including stakeholder pensions, but who were nevertheless above the level to qualify for the full guarantee credit. The Decent Homes program helped to upgrade a substantial number of properties in the social housing sector, while the Children Leaving Care Act of 2000 placed new obligations on local authorities to take more responsibility for young people brought up in their care after the age of 16. Free nursery education for 3- and 4-year-olds was introduced, while extended schools and after-school clubs were developed. Tax exemptions on child care vouchers were also introduced, together with paid paternity and parental leave.
Environmental record.
Blair has criticized other governments for not doing enough to solve global climate change. In a 1997 visit to the United States, he made a comment on great industrialized nations that fail to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Again in 2003, Blair went before the United States Congress and said that climate change cannot be ignored, insisting we need to go beyond even Kyoto. Blair and his party promised a 20% reduction in carbon dioxide. The Labour Party also claimed that by 2010 10% of the energy would come from renewable resources. However, only 3% currently does. In 2000 Blair flagged up €100 million for green policies and urged environmentalists and businesses to work together.
Foreign policy.
Blair forged friendships with several conservative European leaders, including Silvio Berlusconi of Italy, Angela Merkel of Germany and more recently Nicolas Sarkozy of France.
Relationship with the United States.
Along with enjoying a close relationship with Bill Clinton, Blair formed a strong political alliance with George W. Bush, particularly in the area of foreign policy. Critics of this relationship have often referred to Blair as Bush's poodle. Kendall Myers, a senior analyst at the State Department, reportedly said that he felt a little ashamed of Bush's treatment of the Prime Minister and that his attempts to influence U.S. policy were typically ignored. It was a done deal from the beginning, it was a one-sided relationship that was entered into with open eyes. There was nothing, no payback, no sense of reciprocity. For his part, Bush lauded Blair and the UK. In his post-9/11 speech, for example, he stated that America has no truer friend than Great Britain. The alliance between Bush and Blair seriously damaged Blair's standing in the eyes of many British people. Blair argued it is in Britain's interest to protect and strengthen the bond with the United States regardless of who is in the White House. However, a perception of one-sided compromising personal and political closeness led to serious discussion of the term poodleism in the UK media, to describe the special relationship of the UK government and Prime Minister with the US White House and President. A revealing conversation between Bush and Blair, with the former addressing the latter as Yo, Blair was recorded when they did not know a microphone was live at the G8 summit in St. Petersburg in 2006.
Middle East policy and links with Israel.
According to comments in the book, Blair, written by Anthony Seldon, Blair had a deep feeling for Israel, born in part from his faith. Blair has been a long-time member of the pro-Israel lobby group Labour Friends of Israel. In 1994, Blair forged close ties with Michael Levy, a music tycoon and a founder of the Jewish Leadership Council. Levy ran the Labour Leaders Office Fund to finance Blair's campaign before the 1997 election and raised $12 million towards Labour's landslide victory. Levy was rewarded with a peerage, and in 2002, Blair appointed Lord Levy as his personal envoy to the Middle East. Levy praised Blair for his solid and committed support of the State of Israel. Tam Dalyell, while father of the House of Commons, suggested in 2003 that Blair's foreign policy decisions were unduly influenced by a cabal of Jewish advisers, including Levy, Peter Mandelson and Jack Straw, the last who are not Jewish but have some Jewish ancestry. Blair, on coming to office, had been cool towards the right-wing Netanyahu government. During his first visit to Israel, Blair thought the Israelis bugged him in his car. He also went on to claim that Prime Minister Netanyahu was merely an armor-plated bullshitter. After the election in 1999 of Ehud Barak, with whom Blair forged a close relationship, he became much more sympathetic to Israel. From 2001 Blair also built up a relationship with Barak's successor, Ariel Sharon, and responded positively to Arafat, whom he had met 13 times since becoming Prime Minister and regarded as essential to future negotiations. In 2004, 50 former diplomats, including ambassadors to Baghdad and Tel Aviv, stated they had watched with deepening concern at Britain following the U.S. interwar in Iraq in 2003. They criticized Blair's support for the roadmap for peace, which included the retaining of Israeli settlements on the West Bank. In 2006 Blair was criticized for his failure to immediately call for a ceasefire in the 2006 Israel-Lebanon conflict. The Observer newspaper claimed that at a cabinet meeting before Blair left for a summit with Bush on July 28, 2006, a significant number of ministers pressured Blair to publicly criticize Israel over the scale of deaths and destruction in Lebanon. Blair was criticized for his solid stance alongside U.S. President George W. Bush on Middle East policy.
Syria and Libya.
A Freedom of Information request by the Sunday Times in 2012 revealed that Blair's government considered knighting Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. The documents also showed that Blair was willing to appear alongside Assad at a joint press conference even though the Syrians would probably have settled for a farewell handshake for the cameras. British officials sought to manipulate the media to portray Assad in a favourable light. And Blair's aides tried to help Assad's photogenic wife boost her profile. The newspaper noted, Blair had been on friendly terms with Colonel Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, when sanctions imposed on the country were lifted by United States and United Kingdom. Even after the Libyan civil war in 2011, he said he had no regrets about his close relationship with the late Libyan leader. During Blair's premiership, MI6 rendered Abdel Hakim Bilhaj to the Gaddafi regime in 2004, though Blair later claimed he had no recollection of the incident.
Relationship with media. Rupert Murdoch.
Blair was reported to have been supported by Rupert Murdoch, the founder of the News Corporation organization. In 1995, while leader of the opposition, Blair disclosed in the Commons Register of Interests that he was a guest of Murdoch when he flew to meet him in Hayman Island. In 2011 Blair became godfather to one of Rupert Murdoch's children. Apparently Blair was robed in white for the ceremony.
Contacts with UK media proprietors.
A Cabinet Office Freedom of Information response, released the day after Blair handed over power to Gordon Brown, documents Blair having various official phone calls and meetings with Rupert Murdoch of News Corporation and Richard Desmond of Northern and Shell Media. The response includes contacts clearly of an official nature in the specified period, but excludes contacts not clearly of an official nature. No details were given of the subjects discussed. In the period between September 2002 and April 2005, Blair and Murdoch are documented speaking 6 times. 3 times in the 9 days before the Iraq War, including the eve of March 20 US and UK invasion, and on January 29, 25 April and October 3, 2004. Between January 2003 and February 2004, Blair had 3 meetings with Richard Desmond. On January 29 and 3 September 2003 and 23 February 2004. The information was disclosed after a 3.5-year battle by the Liberal Democrats Lord of Ebury. Lord of Ebury's initial October 2003 information request was dismissed by then Leader of the Lords, Baroness Amos. A following complaint was rejected, with Downing Street claiming the information compromised free and frank discussions, while Cabinet Office claimed releasing the timing of the PM's contacts with individuals is undesirable, as it might lead to the content of the discussions being disclosed. While awaiting a following appeal from Lord of Ebury, the Cabinet Office announced that it would release the information. Lord of Ebury said, "The public can now scrutinise the timing of his, Murdoch's, contacts with the former Prime Minister, to see whether they can be linked to events in the outside world." Blair appeared before the Leveson inquiry on Monday 28 May 2012. During his appearance, a protester, later named as David Lawley Wakelin, got into the courtroom and claimed he was guilty of war crimes before being dragged out.
Media portrayal.
Blair has been noted as a charismatic, articulate speaker with an informal style. Film and theatre director Richard Eyre opined that Blair had a very considerable skill as a performer. A few months after becoming Prime Minister, Blair gave a tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales, on the morning of her death in August 1997, in which he famously described her as the People's Princess. After taking office in 1997, Blair gave particular prominence to his press secretary, who became known as the Prime Minister's official spokesman. The two roles have since been separated. Blair's first PMOS was Alistair Campbell, who served in that role from May 1997 to June 8, 2001, after which he served as the Prime Minister's Director of Communications and Strategy until his resignation on August 29, 2003 in the aftermath of the Hutton inquiry.
Relationship with Labour Party.
Blair's apparent refusal to set a date for his departure was criticised by the British press and members of Parliament. It has been reported that a number of cabinet ministers believed that Blair's timely departure from office would be required to be able to win a fourth election. Some ministers viewed Blair's announcement of policy initiatives in September 2006 as an attempt to draw attention away from these issues.
Gordon Brown.
After the death of John Smith in 1994, Blair and his close colleague Gordon Brown, they shared an office at the House of Commons, were both seen as possible candidates for the party leadership. They agreed not to stand against each other, it is said, as part of a supposed Blair-Brown pact. Brown, who considered himself the senior of the two, understood that Blair would give way to him. Opinion polls soon indicated, however, that Blair appeared to enjoy greater support among voters. Their relationship in power became so turbulent that, it was reported, the Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, often had to act as marriage guidance counsellor. During the 2010 election campaign, Blair publicly endorsed Gordon Brown's leadership, praising the way he had handled the financial crisis.
Post-prime ministerial career. Diplomacy.
On June 27, 2007, Blair officially resigned as Prime Minister after 10 years in office, and he was officially confirmed as Middle East envoy for the United Nations, European Union, United States, and Russia. Blair originally indicated that he would retain his parliamentary seat after his resignation as Prime Minister came into effect. However, on being confirmed for the Middle East role, he resigned from the Commons by taking up an office of profit. President George W. Bush had preliminary talks with Blair to ask him to take up the envoy role. White House sources stated that, both Israel and the Palestinians had signed up to the proposal. In May 2008, Blair announced a new plan for peace and for Palestinian rights, based heavily on the ideas of the Peace Valley Plan.
Private sector.
In January 2008, it was confirmed that Blair would be joining investment bank JP Morgan Chase in a senior advisory capacity, and that he would advise Zurich Financial Services on climate change. His salary for this work is unknown, although it has been claimed it may be in excess of $500,000 per year. Blair also gives lectures, earning up to $250,000 for a 90-minute speech, and in 2008 he was said to be the highest-paid speaker in the world. Yale University announced on March 7, 2008 that Blair will teach a course on issues of faith and globalization at the Yale Schools of Management and Divinity as a Howland Distinguished Fellow during the 2008 September academic year. Blair's links with, and receipt of an undisclosed sum from, UI Energy Corporation, have also been subject to media comment in the UK. In July 2010 it was reported that his personal security guards claimed $250,000 a year in expenses from the taxpayer, Foreign Secretary William Hague said. "We have to make sure that it is as cost-effective as possible, that it doesn't cost any more to the taxpayer than is absolutely necessary."
Tony Blair Associates.
Blair has established Tony Blair Associates to allow him to provide, in partnership with others, strategic advice on a commercial and pro bono basis, on political and economic trends and governmental reform. The profits from the firm go towards supporting Blair's work on faith, Africa and climate change. Blair has been subject to criticism for potential conflicts of interest between his diplomatic role as a Middle East peace envoy, and his work with Tony Blair Associates. Blair has used his quartet. Tony Blair Associates works with the Kazakhstan government, advising the regime on judicial, economic and political reforms, but has been subject to criticism after accusations of whitewashing the image and human rights record of the regime. In particular, opposition activists have published an open letter in a Kazakh newspaper, Respublika, claiming Blair would have blood on his hands if did not stop assisting President Nursultan Nazarbayev. Blair has responded to such criticism by saying his choice to advise the country is an example of how he can nudge controversial figures on a progressive path of reform, and has stated that he receives no personal profit from this advisory role. The Kazakhstan foreign minister has said that the country was honored and privileged to be receiving advice from Blair.
European Council President speculation.
In October 2007, there was speculation in the media that Blair was open to the idea of becoming the first president of the European Council, a post created in the Treaty of Lisbon that would come into force in 2009, if successfully ratified. Gordon Brown added his support, but noted that it was premature to discuss candidates before the treaty was approved. A spokesman for Blair did not rule out him accepting the post, but said that he was concentrating on his current role in the Middle East. Blair was later invited to speak on European issues at a rally of President Sarkozy's party, the Union for a Popular Movement, on January 12, 2008, which fueled speculation further. There was opposition to Blair's potential candidacy for the job. In the UK, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats both said they would oppose Blair. In Germany, the leader of the Free Democrats, Guido Westerwelle, said that he preferred a candidate from a smaller European country. In November 2009, the Belgian PM Herman Van Rompuy was named President of the European Council.
Charity.
On November 14, 2007, Blair launched the Tony Blair Sports Foundation, which aims to increase childhood participation in sports activities, especially in the northeast of England, where a larger proportion of children are socially excluded, and to promote overall health and prevent childhood obesity. On May 30, 2008, Blair launched the Tony Blair Faith Foundation as a vehicle for encouraging different faiths to join together in promoting respect and understanding, as well as working to tackle poverty. Reflecting Blair's own faith but not dedicated to any particular religion, the foundation aims to show how faith is a powerful force for good in the modern world. The foundation will use its profile and resources to encourage people of faith to work together more closely to tackle global poverty and conflict, says its mission statement. In February 2009, he applied to set up a charity called the Tony Blair Africa Governance Initiative. The application was approved in November 2009. In October 2012, Blair's foundation hit controversy when it emerged they were taking on unpaid interns.
Memoirs.
In March 2010, it was reported that Blair's memoirs, titled The Journey, would be published in September 2010. In July 2010 it was announced the memoirs would be retitled A Journey. The memoirs was seen by many as controversial and a further attempt to profit from his office and from acts related to overseas wars that were widely seen as wrongful, leading to anger and suspicion prior to launch. On August 16, 2010 it was announced that Blair would give the PS $4.6 million advance and all royalties from his memoirs to a sports centre for badly injured soldiers, the charity's largest ever single donation. Media analysis of the sudden announcement was wide-ranging, describing it as an act of desperation to obtain a better launch reception of a humiliating publishing flop that had languished in the ratings, blood money for the lives lost in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, an act with a hidden motive, or an expression of guilt, a genius move to address the problem that Tony Blair are one of the most toxic brands around from a PR perspective, and a cynical stunt to wipe the slate, but also as an attempt to make amends. Friends had said that the act was partly motivated by the wish to repair his reputation. The book was published on September 1 and within hours of its launch had become the fastest-selling autobiography of all time. On September 3, Blair gave his first live interview since publication on The Late Late Show in Ireland, with protesters lying in wait there for him. On September 4 Blair was confronted by 200 anti-war and hardline Irish nationalist demonstrators before the first book signing of his memoirs at Eason's bookstore on O'Connell Street in Dublin, with angry activists chanting "war criminal," and that he had blood on his hands, and clashing with Irish police, Garda Síochána, as they tried to break through a security cordon outside the Eason store. Blair was pelted with eggs and shoes, and encountered an attempted citizen's arrest for war crimes.
Accusations of war crimes.
Since the Iraq War, Blair has been the subject of accusations of war crimes. Critics of his actions, including Bishop Desmond Tutu, Harold Pinter and Arundhati Roy, have called for his trial at the International Criminal Court. On November 2011, a mock war crimes tribunal put together by the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Commission reached a unanimous conclusion that Blair and George W. Bush are guilty of crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and genocide as a result of their roles in the 2003 Iraq War. The mock trial, which lasted 4 days, consisting of 5 judges of judicial and academic backgrounds, a court-appointed defense team in lieu of the defendants or representatives, and a prosecution team including international law professor Francis Boyle. The mock tribunal's finding received mixed responses, being labeled a circus by former UN Special Rapporteur Param Kumarasamy. In September 2012, Desmond Tutu suggested that Blair should follow the path of former African leaders who had been brought before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The human rights lawyer Geoffrey Bindman, interviewed on BBC Radio, concurred with Tutu's suggestion that there should be a war crimes trial. In a statement made in response to Tutu's comments, Blair defended his actions. He was supported by Lord Falconer, who stated that the war had been properly authorized by United Nations Security Council Resolution 1441.
Personal life. Family.
Blair married Cherie Booth, a Roman Catholic and future Queen's Counsel, on March 29, 1980. They have 4 children, Ewan, Nicholas, Catherine, and Leo. Leo, delivered by the royal surgeon-gynecologist Marcus Setchell, was the first legitimate child born to a serving Prime Minister in over 150 years, since Francis Russell was born to Lord John Russell on July 11, 1849. Blair was criticised when it was discovered that one child had received private tuition from staff at Westminster School. All 4 children have Irish passports, by virtue of Blair's mother, Hazel Elizabeth Rosaleen Cascaden, 1923–1975. The family's primary residence is in Connaught Square, and the Blairs own 8 residences.
Personal health.
Blair suffered from chest pains on Sunday 19 October 2003 and underwent a cardioversion at Hammersmith Hospital.
Wealth.
Blair has a personal fortune of over £60 million and over 200 employees working for him across his multiple consultancies and foundations.
Religious faith.
In an interview with Michael Parkinson broadcast on ITV1 on March 4, 2006, Blair referred to the role of his Christian faith in his decision to go to war in Iraq, stating that he had prayed about the issue, and saying that God would judge him for his decision. "I think if you have faith about these things, you realize that judgment is made by other people. And if you believe in God, it's made by God as well." According to Alistair Campbell's diary, Blair often read the Bible before taking any important decisions. He states that Blair had a wobble, and considered changing his mind on the eve of the bombing of Iraq in 1998. A longer exploration of his faith can be found in an interview with Third Way magazine. There he says that "I was brought up as, but I was not in any real sense a practicing one until I went to Oxford. There was an Australian priest at the same college as me who got me interested again. In a sense, it was a rediscovery of religion as something living, that was about the world around me rather than some sort of special one-to-one relationship with a remote being on high. Suddenly I began to see its social relevance. I began to make sense of the world." At one point Alistair Campbell intervened in an interview, preventing the Prime Minister from answering a question about his Christianity, explaining, "We don't do God." Campbell later explained that he had intervened only to end the interview because the journalist had been taking an excessive time, and that the comment had just been a throwaway line. Cherie Blair's friend and spiritual guru Carol Kaplan is credited with introducing her and her husband to various New Age symbols and beliefs, including magic pendants known as bioelectric shields. The most controversial of the Blair's New Age practices occurred when on holiday in Mexico. The couple, wearing only bathing costumes, took part in a rebirthing procedure, which involved smearing mud and fruit over each other's bodies while sitting in a steam bath. Later on, Blair questioned the Pope's attitude towards homosexuality, arguing that religious leaders must start rethinking the issue. Blair was reprimanded by Cardinal Basil Hume in 1996 for receiving Holy Communion at Mass, while still an Anglican, in contravention of canon law. On December 22, 2007, it was disclosed that Blair had converted to the Catholic faith. The conversion was described as a private matter. He had informed Pope Benedict XVI on June 23, 2007 that he wanted to become a Catholic. The Pope and his advisers criticized some of Blair's political actions, but followed up with a reportedly unprecedented red carpet welcome, which included the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who would be responsible for Blair's Catholic instruction. In 2010, the tablet named him as one of Britain's most influential Roman Catholics.
Portrayals and cameo appearances. Appearances.
Blair made an animated cameo appearance as himself in The Simpsons episode, The Regina Monologues, 2003. He has also appeared as himself at the end of the first episode of The Amazing Mrs. Pritchard, a British television series about an unknown housewife becoming Prime Minister. On March 14, 2007, Blair appeared as a celebrity judge on MasterChef Goes Large after contestants had to prepare a three-course meal in the Downing Street kitchens for Blair and Bertie Ahern. On March 16, 2007, Blair featured in a comedy sketch with Catherine Tate, who appeared in the guise of her character Lauren Cooper from The Catherine Tate Show. The sketch was made for the BBC Red Nose Day fundraising programme of 2007. During the sketch, Blair used Lauren's catchphrase "Am I Bovert?"
Portrayals.
Michael Sheen has portrayed Blair 3 times, in the films The Deal, 2003, The Queen, 2006, and The Special Relationship, 2009. Robert Lindsay portrayed Blair in the TV programme A Very Social Secretary, 2005, and reprised the role in The Trial of Tony Blair, 2007. He was also portrayed by James Larkin in The Government Inspector, 2005, and by Ian Grufford in W. 2008. In the 2006 Channel 4 comedy drama documentary, Tony Blair, Rock Star, he was portrayed by Christian Brassington.
Blair in fiction and satire.
When Blair resigned as Prime Minister, Robert Harris, a former Fleet Street political editor, dropped his other work to write The Ghost. The CIA-influenced British Prime Minister in the book is said to be a thinly disguised version of Blair. In November 2007 it was announced that Roman Polanski was to direct the film version of the novel, and would be writing the script with Harris. The film The Ghostwriter was released in February 2010 in the US. Polanski's film saw Pierce Brosnan portray former Prime Minister Adam Lang, and dramatizes Blair's relationship with the United States, as well as the possibility of war crime charges. Stephen Mangan portrays Blair in The Hunt for Tony Blair, 2011, a one-off The comic strip presents. Satire presented in the style of a 1950s film noir. In the film, he is wrongly implicated in the deaths of Robin Cook and John Smith and on the run from Inspector Hutton. In 2007, the scenario of a possible war crimes trial for the former British Prime Minister was satirised by the British broadcaster Channel 4, in a mockumentary, The Trial of Tony Blair, which concluded with a fictional Blair being dispatched to The Hague.
Titles and honors. Styles from 1983 election onwards.
Mr. Anthony Charles Linton Blair MP, 1983 to 1994. The RT Honourable Anthony Charles Linton Blair MP, 1994 to 2007. The RT Honourable Anthony Charles Linton Blair, 2007.
Appointments.
Privy Councillor, 1994.
Honours.
Congressional Gold Medal, 2003, Honorary Doctor of Law, LLD from Queen's University Belfast, 2008, Presidential Medal of Freedom, 2009, Dan David Prize, 2009, Liberty Medal, 2010. In May 2007, before his resignation, it was reported that Blair would be offered a knighthood in the Order of the Thistle, owing to his Scottish connections, rather than the Order of the Garter, which is usually offered to former prime ministers. No such move has been made since, and Blair has reportedly indicated that he does not want the traditional knighthood or peerage bestowed on former prime ministers. On May 22, 2008, Blair received an honorary law doctorate from Queen's University Belfast, alongside former Taoiseach H. Bertie Ahern, for distinction in public service and roles in the Northern Ireland peace process. On January 13, 2009, Blair was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President George W. Bush. Bush stated that Blair was given the award in recognition of exemplary achievement and to convey the utmost esteem of the American people, and cited Blair's support for the war on terror and his role in achieving peace in Northern Ireland as two reasons for justifying his being presented with the award. On February 16, 2009, Blair was awarded the Dan David Prize by Tel Aviv University for exceptional leadership and steadfast determination in helping to engineer agreements and forge lasting solutions to areas in conflict. He was awarded the prize in May 2009. On September 13, 2010, Blair was awarded the Liberty Medal at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was presented by former President Bill Clinton, and is awarded annually to men and women of courage and conviction who strive to secure the blessings of liberty to people around the globe. Because Blair is credited as being instrumental in ending the conflict in Kosovo, boys born in that country following the war have been given the name Tony or Tonibula.
Works.
Blair, Tony, 2010. A Journey. Random House, ISBN 0-09-192555-XOCLC number 657172683 London, Blair, Tony, 2002. The Courage of Our Convictions. Fabian Society, ISBN 0-7163-0603-4 London, Blair, Tony, 2000. Superpower, Not Superstate. Federal Trust European Essays. Federal Trust for Education and Research, ISBN 1-903403-25-1 London, Blair, Tony, 1998. The Third Way, New Politics for the New Century. Fabian Society, ISBN 0-7163-0588-7 London, Blair, Tony, 1998. Leading the Way, New Vision for Local Government. Institute for Public Policy Research, ISBN 1-86030-075-8 London, Blair, Tony, 1997. New Britain, My Vision of a Young Country. Basic Books, ISBN 0-8133-3338-5 New York, Blair, Tony, 1995. Let Us Face the Future. Fabian Society, ISBN 0-7163-0571-2 London, Blair, Tony, 1994. What Price Saves Society? Fabian Society, ISBN 0-7163-0562-3 London, Blair, Tony, 1994. Socialism. Fabian Society, ISBN 0-7163-0565-8 London.
Tony Blair.
Anthony Charles Linton Blair is a British Labour Party politician who served as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1997 to 2007. He was the Member of Parliament for Sedgefield from 1983 to 2007 and leader of the Labour Party from 1994 to 2007. Blair led Labour to a landslide victory in the 1997 general election, winning 418 seats, the most the party has ever held. The party went on to win two more elections under his leadership, in 2001, in which it won another landslide victory, and in 2005, with a significantly reduced majority. Blair was elected Labour Party leader in the leadership election of July 1994, following the sudden death of his predecessor, John Smith. Under his leadership, the party used the phrase New Labour to distance it from previous Labour policies. Blair declared opposition to the traditional conception of socialism, and declared support for a new conception that he referred to as socialism, involving politics that recognized individuals as socially interdependent, and advocated social justice, cohesion, equal worth of each citizen, and equal opportunity. Critics of Blair denounced him for having the Labour Party abandon genuine socialism and accepting capitalism. Supporters, including the party's own public opinion pollster Philip Gould, stated that after 4 consecutive general election defeats, Labour had to demonstrate that it had made a decisive break from its left-wing past, in order to win again. In May 1997, at 43 years old, Blair won a landslide general election victory, the largest in Labour Party history, to become the youngest Prime Minister since Lord Liverpool in 1812. He attained early personal popularity, receiving a 93% public approval rating in September 1997, after the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. In the fight the seat. With the crucial support of John Burton, Blair won their endorsement. At the last minute, he was added to the shortlist and won the selection over Les Huckfield. Burton later became Blair's election agent and one of his most trusted and longest-standing allies. Blair's election literature in the 1983 UK general election endorsed left-wing policies that Labour advocated in the early 1980s. He called for Britain to leave the EEC, though he had told his selection conference that he personally favoured continuing membership. He also supported unilateral nuclear disarmament as a member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Blair was helped on the campaign trail by soap opera actress Pat Phoenix, his father-in-law's girlfriend. Blair was elected as MP for Sedgefield despite the party's landslide defeat in the general election. In his maiden speech in the House of Commons on July 6, 1983, Blair stated, "I am a socialist not through reading a textbook that has caught my intellectual fancy, nor through unthinking tradition, but because I believe that, at its best, socialism corresponds most closely to an existence that is both rational and moral. It stands for cooperation, not confrontation. For fellowship, not fear. It stands for equality. the Labour Party is declared in its constitution to be a democratic socialist party rather than a social democratic party. Blair himself organised this declaration of Labour to be a socialist party when he dealt with the change to the party's Clause 4 in their constitution. Once elected, Blair's political ascent was rapid. He received his first front bench appointment in 1984 as Assistant Treasury Spokesman. In May 1985, he appeared on BBC's Question Time, arguing that the Conservative government's Public Order White Paper was a threat to civil liberties. Blair demanded an inquiry into the Bank of England's decision to rescue the collapsed Johnson-Matthey Bank in 1916 but returned to, and later died in, Ballyshannon in 1923, where his wife, Sarah Margaret, née Lipset, gave birth to Blair's mother, Hazel, above her family's grocery shop. Blair has one elder brother, Sir William Blair, a High Court judge, and a younger sister, Sarah. Blair spent the first 19 months of his life at the family home in Paisley Terrace in the Willowbrae area of Edinburgh. During this period, his father worked as a junior tax inspector whilst also studying for a law degree from the University of Edinburgh. In the 1950s, his family spent 3.5 years in Adelaide, Australia, where his father was a lecturer in law at the University of Adelaide. The Blairs lived close to the university, in the suburb of Dulwich. The family returned to the UK in the late 1950s, living for a time with Hazel Blair's stepfather, William Maclay, and her mother at their home in Steps, near Glasgow. He spent the remainder of his childhood in Durham, England, where his father Leo lectured at Durham University.
Education.
After attending the Chorister School in Durham from 1961 to 1966, Blair boarded at Fettes College, a prestigious independent school in Edinburgh, during which time he met Charlie Falconer, a pupil at the rival Edinburgh Academy, whom he later appointed Lord Chancellor. He reportedly modelled himself on Mick Jagger. His teachers were unimpressed with him. His biographer John Reen-Towell reported that all the teachers I spoke to when researching the book said he was a complete pain in the backside and they were very glad to see the back of him. After Fettes, Blair spent a year in London, where he attempted to find fame as a rock music promoter before reading jurisprudence at St John's College, Oxford. As a student, he played guitar and sang in a rock band called Ugly Rumours. During this time, he dated future American Psycho director Mary Harron. He was in the years of the new Labour government. Blair's government implemented a number of 1997 manifesto pledges, introducing the National Minimum Wage Act, Human Rights Act and Freedom of Information Act, and carrying out devolution, establishing the Scottish Parliament, the National Assembly for Wales, and the Northern Ireland Assembly. Blair's role as Prime Minister was particularly visible in foreign and security policy, including in Northern Ireland, where he was involved in the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. From the start of the War on Terror in 2001, Blair strongly supported the foreign policy of U.S. President George W. Bush, notably by participating in the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan and 2003 invasion of Iraq. Blair is the Labour Party's longest-serving Prime Minister, the only person to have led the Labour Party to more than 2 consecutive general election victories, and the only Labour Prime Minister to serve consecutive terms, more than one of which was at least 4 years long. Blair was succeeded as leader of the Labour Party on June 24, 2007 and as Prime Minister on June 27, 2007 by Gordon Brown. On the day he resigned as Prime Minister, he was appointed the official envoy of the Quartet on the Middle East. In May 2008, Blair launched his Tony Blair Faith Foundation. This was followed in July 2009 by the launching of the Faith and Globalization Initiative with Yale University in the US, Durham University in the UK and the National University of Singapore in Asia to deliver a postgraduate program in partnership with the foundation.
Early life.
Blair was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, on May 6, 1953, the second son of Leo and Hazel Blair, née Cuscaden. Leo Blair, the illegitimate son of 2 English actors, had been adopted as a baby by Glasgow shipyard worker James Blair and his wife, Mary. Hazel Cascaden was the daughter of George Cascaden, a butcher and orangeman who moved to Glasgow influenced by fellow student and Anglican priest Peter Thompson, who awakened within Blair a deep concern for religious faith and left-wing politics. While Blair was at Oxford, his mother Hazel died of cancer, which greatly affected him. After graduating from Oxford in 1975 with a second-class honours BA in jurisprudence, Blair became a member of Lincoln's Inn, enrolled as a pupil barrister, and met his future wife, Cherie Booth, daughter of the actor Tony Booth, at the Law Chambers founded by Derry Irvine, who was to be Blair's first Lord Chancellor, 11 King's Bench Walk Chambers. He appears in a number of reported cases, for example as in Nethermere, St Neots, Limited v Gardner, where he represented employers unsuccessfully in an attempt to deny female factory workers their holiday pay.
Early political career.
Blair joined the Labour Party shortly after graduating from Oxford in 1975. During the early 1980s, he was involved in Labour politics in Hackney South and Shoreditch, where he aligned himself with the soft left of the party. In 1982 Blair was selected as the Labour candidate in the safe Conservative seat of Beaconsfield, where there was a forthcoming by-election. Although Blair lost the Beaconsfield by-election, the only election he lost in his 25-year political career, and he lost 10% of the vote, he acquired a profile within the party. In contrast to his later centrism, Blair made it clear in a letter he wrote to Labour leader Michael Foot in July 1982, that he had come to socialism through Marxism, and considered himself on the left. The letter was eventually published in June 2006. In 1983, Blair found the newly created constituency of Sedgefield, a notionally safe Labour seat near where he had grown up in Durham. The branch had not made a nomination, and Blair visited them. Several sitting MPs displaced by boundary changes were interested in securing selection to